Chapter 3. Who conducted the Underground Railroad? There were many African American and white conductors on the Underground Railroad. Some conductors gave runaway slaves food and safe places to hide. Other conductors took runaway slaves to the next station on the Underground Railroad. Thousands of slaves had these brave conductors to thank for their ride to freedom. Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman is one of the most famous Underground Railroad conductors. Harriet was a slave in Maryland. After she ran away to freedom in Pennsylvania, Harriet wanted other slaves to be free too. Risking her own freedom, Harriet returned to Maryland many times. She wore disguises. She tricked slave owners. Harriet conducted over 300 slaves to freedom. Harriet said proudly, "On my Underground Railroad, I never ran my train off the track and I never lost a passenger." Fact, there was a reward of $40,000 offered for the capture of Harriet Tubman. Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was a slave in Maryland. One day he decided to run away. He dressed up like a sailor and sailed to freedom on a ship. As a free man, Frederick began his own newspaper to spread the word against slavery. Douglass called his newspaper the North Star, for the star which guided slaves to freedom. Douglass conducted dozens of runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad to freedom in Canada from his station home in Rochester, New York. Levi and Catherine Coffin. Levi and Catherine Coffin were conductors on the Underground Railroad in Ohio. Their home was an important station. The Coffins gave food, shelter, and clothing to the passengers who stopped at their station. Sometimes runaway slaves lived for weeks in the Coffins' home, and no one but the Coffins knew they were there. The Coffins helped over 2,000 slaves travel north on the Underground Railroad. William Still. William Still was an important conductor on the Philadelphia route of the Underground Railroad. William Still gave runaway slaves food and money and helped them find jobs. He sent slaves north on the Underground Railroad. He talked with the runaway slaves about their lives. When the Underground Railroad stopped running after the Civil War, William Still wrote a book called The Underground Railroad. His book told the daring stories of slaves riding to freedom. John Rankin. John Rankin lived high on Liberty Hill in Ripley, Ohio. Runaway slaves in Kentucky could see John Rankin's house across the Ohio River. The slaves knew John Rankin would help them when they reached his house after crossing the river. At night, John Rankin hung a lantern in his house. If the lantern was lit, slaves knew it was safe to come to the Rankin house. For 40 years, John Rankin and his family helped runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad. Fact, Rankin's 13 children were conductors too. Underground Railroad conductors. Some Underground Railroad conductors like Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass became famous. There were many other conductors who will never be known for helping slaves escape to freedom, but without their secret help, many runaway slaves would have missed their rides on the Underground Railroad. Chapter 4. How did runaway slaves follow the Underground Railroad? Every runaway slave had to find his or her own road to freedom. Some made it to the north on their own. Thousands more rode the Underground Railroad to freedom in the North or Canada. A big secret. Many people in the North and South knew about the Underground Railroad, but the Underground Railroad routes were kept secret so slave owners could not find their runaway slaves. The Underground Railroad secrets were shared only with people who could be trusted. Secret songs and signs. Secret signals helped the slaves ride the Underground Railroad. Conductors sang songs telling slaves when it was safe to run away or when to hide. Conductors hung lanterns in their windows. A light in the night meant it was safe to move on the Underground Railroad. A friend with friends was secret code telling a conductor that passengers had arrived at his station. Fact, bird calls were used as secret signals. Codes in quilts. Quilts with secret messages in them helped slaves escape on the Underground Railroad. Some quilts were maps showing safe routes north. A flying geese pattern on a quilt hanging on a clothesline might have told slaves it was safe to head north. A slave owner might see a quilt, but not know the quilt's secret meaning hidden in plain view. Freedom nearby. Slaves in Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, and Kentucky did not have to travel far to be free. These southern states were near free northern states. Slaves were free once they reached Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. The Ohio River flowed 350 miles between slave states and many free states. Runaway slaves were free once they crossed the Ohio River. but there was danger along the way. Laws said runaway slaves could be captured in free states. Then the slaves were returned in chains to their masters. A long, difficult road. Slaves running away from Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Tennessee, and South Carolina had a long way to go to be free. Some hid on steamboats going up the Mississippi River. Others slipped secretly aboard ships sailing north. Most walked hundreds of dangerous miles to freedom. They hid in swamps and forests during the day. They traveled at night. Along the way, many conductors helped them on the Underground Railroad. Springtime. Many slaves ran away in the spring. They followed the geese flying north. Spring rains washed away their footprints and their scents. Slave catchers and their dogs could not follow runaway slaves' trails. Slaves often ran away on Saturday nights because Sunday was a day of rest. Running all night and Saturday and Sunday gave the slaves a head start before they would be missed by their owners on Monday morning. Follow the Drinking Gourd. Many slaves knew the song Follow the Drinking Gourd. This song guided slaves north to freedom. The Drinking Gourd was another name for a group of stars called the Big Dipper. The two front stars in the Big Dipper's bowl pointed to the North Star. When slaves followed the North Star, they knew they were going north toward freedom. When the sun come back, when the first quail call, then the time has come, follow the Drinking Gourd.